Hello and very warm welcome to this edition of Public Forum. I'm Shalini Verma. The 11th Ministerial Conference, called the MC11 of the World Trade Organization, ended on Wednesday without any substantial outcome as consensus eluded the 164-member body. India insisted that the body must find a permanent solution on public stock holding for food security, but the US blocked the move. India also toughened its stance on new issues including e-commerce and investment facilitation. One of the key focuses this time was on protecting the interest of Indian fishermen from proposal to eliminate fishery subsidies. Member states agreed to set a new goal for reaching a comprehensive fishery subsidy by the time of the next ministerial conference in 2019.
The World Trade Organization's biennial meeting ended in stalemate on Wednesday after US criticism and member country vetoed, raising questions about the body's ability to govern increasingly disputed global trade. Ministers gathered in Buenos Aires were never expected to agree on major trade reforms, but even relatively minor proposals on e-commerce and fishing subsidy curbs ran aground. WTO Director General Roberto Azevedo added that WTO members needed to do some real soul-searching about the way forward and realize they cannot get everything they want.
If we really all support the WTO, if we really do, we have to bear in mind that multilateralism doesn't mean that we get what we want. It means that we get what is possible. It's not compatible to expect multilateralism to work and at the same time expect to walk out with everything you wanted. This is a recipe for failure. If we prize the system, we have to come knowing that we will have to make compromises, sometimes painful compromises. This element can definitely be improved in the WTO.
Absent any agreements, trade ministers focused on the WTO's post-conference work programs, such as efforts to improve market efficiency and curb excess industrial capacity, WTO spokesman Keith Rockwell told reporters. Susana Malcorra, the former Argentine foreign minister and chair of the conference, said that while the WTO's large membership made agreement difficult, unanimity was essential. Meanwhile, anti-globalization activists protested in Buenos Aires at the lack of consensus on public stock holding regarding subsidized food. With India at the forefront, developing countries pushed hard to find consensus on the matter, but were blocked by the US. Commerce and Industry Minister Suresh Prabhu maintained that India was in favor of open, transparent, democratic platforms to discuss trade issues.
We are certainly in favor of open, transparent, democratic platform through which issues can be discussed and debated related to the WTO mandate. If any country is trying to resist it, it is not the right way to do it because this is not in the interest and the spirit of the WTO. So I would not make a value judgment on any particular country because that's what we don't discuss bilateral issues in a way. We'll take it multilateral way. What are the issues involved with this? But as I said, it's necessary for all the countries in the world today to reaffirm their commitment, reiterate their issue to progress on the WTO-related issues for a simple reason. This is a platform which has been created over a long period of time. This helps us to understand each other better, and this provides almost a level playing field for all the countries.
The failure to reach any major deals at the 11th WTO ministerial meeting means that the negotiations on the same topics will continue into 2018, with no deadline and no heavyweight ministerial momentum to get agreement.
So the 164 member nations of the WTO account for more than 97% of global GDP and 96.8% of global trade. WTO is also the only global international organization dealing with the rules of trade between nations. At its heart are the WTO agreements negotiated and signed by the bulk of world's trading nations and ratified in their parliaments. The goal indeed is to help producers of goods and services, exporters and importers conduct their businesses, believes the WTO. So how crucial was the ministerial meeting held in Argentina? What have the countries achieved, and is there any clarity on the future roadmap? Will WTO be able to accommodate concerns of developing countries like India. To talk more on this, I'm joined by Dr. Sachin Chaturvedi, Director General, Research and Information Systems for Developing Countries, RIS, and Dr. James Nedumpara. He's Professor and Head, Center for Trade and Investment Law, Indian Institute of Foreign Trade, IIFT. Welcome to the program. But I'd like to begin the discussion with you, Dr. Chaturvedi. How crucial was the meeting and how do you assess the outcome?
I think the meeting was quite crucial, and it should have helped us formalize the unfinished agenda that's there on the table. The outcome is quite disappointing, as you can imagine. For last 17 years, we are struggling with the Doha development agenda going somewhere. Unfortunately, this time United States blocked even mentioning of DDA in the outcome document. It blocked any reference to multilateralism, and it also blocked anything related to or the very criteria of spatial and differential treatment. So these are the three areas they have tried to block in the outcome document. And from that point of view, it's quite disappointing that they have also not deepened the understanding on a permanent solution. So continuing with peace clause is something that's fait accompli for countries that are availing this facility. So overall outcome, I think, is a big blow to the global multilateralism, our commitment to global institutional architecture for global trade governance, and that I think is a big disappointment.
But did we take much to the table this time? What was India really expecting?
So if you really look at the WTO, the Doha round, it is a very comprehensive round actually. But over a period of time, some of the issues have basically dropped off the table, and some of the new issues have actually emerged. So India has been basically saying that the agenda has to be wedded to the Doha round. We have to finish some of the issues which were actually raised during the Doha round. And importantly, we should not actually take up new issues like electronic commerce, investment facilitation, unless and until the old issues have been sorted out. And secondly, if you look at the general trend among the negotiating countries, without finishing some of these issues, they are actually coming up with the new issues. So it is basically to actually mask their entire agenda to an extent.
What are these new issues you're talking about?
So the new issues are basically electronic commerce.
Yes.
I mean, that is actually an old issue. There is actually a 1998 kind of a moratorium on customs duty, but they want to really improve upon and come up with a very comprehensive agreement on this particular area. The second is actually investment facilitation. And if you really look at investment facilitation, investment as a subject has been dropped in 2005. So in a way, investment cannot actually get into the WTO because there has already been a decision taken in a subsequent meeting to completely drop this particular item. So in a way, my own feeling is that countries are trying to actually confuse the whole agenda, introduce new issues without resolving some of the existing ones.
And by the, when you say countries, you mean to say the developed countries?
Yeah, mainly the developed countries, and we know who the usual suspect is. So generally, I think there is no particular initiative from the United States at least in taking the Doha agenda to a particular conclusion.
What was this, the fisheries part, the fact that India really wanted to propose, there was this thing which India really wanted to do in order to, the fisheries thing. What exactly is the development there? The countries have agreed that they will set a goal for 2019 and probably come up with an agreement.
Actually, for last 2 years, actually it came in Nairobi, and the idea was to bring in what they call as IUU, the illegal, unregulated, sort of unreported fishing, and this was to be blocked. The challenge here is that there are several countries where IUU and its definitional component is not so clear. So from that point of view, in this, India has got some time in hand in terms of sorting out issues back home, and 2019 is the time that we have got for us, and 2020 is the timeline by which it has to be resolved. So from that point of view, this also is our collective commitment at Sustainable Development Goals, basically Goal 14.6, which gives you a sort of mandate to address this. and this is largely in terms of several areas where this unregulated fishing is going on. But what you call as unregulated fishing, how you define it, what are the ways you are creating sort of safety walls for your own artisans who are engaged in this profession. So from that point of view, we took similar position in Nairobi WTO Ministerial in 2015, and this time again India pressed for it. In fact, if you see the two extremely important achievements for India from this summit, one is to get this time that we could borrow from the process, and second, as James mentioned, about e-commerce, where again we could force them to end up with an informal group rather than formalizing the process.
So when we speak of India, India leading the developing group, the developing countries in their group here at the WTO, do you see some sort of a unity there between India and China there to ensure that those interests are protected?
Actually, Shalini, the era of developed versus developing is in a way over in trade negotiations, as in last 10 years, if you see, after Doha, countries have moved on different trajectories for economic growth. The sectoral achievements are at varied levels, like for instance, in 2003, Brazil, India, China, Brazil, India and South Africa worked together. China was just not there. Three of us worked together to create IPSA and lead the global negotiations under G20 of WTO, and there we worked together. Lula provided the leadership that was needed, though Brazil was a major agriculture exporter at that point. Subsequent administrations in Brazil have moved on, and today you see Brazil sitting with the European Union and United States in agriculture negotiations. China, we are partnering with on fisheries subsidy, we are partnering with China on TRIPS, on many other items, but on MSME, on investment, on e-commerce, China is on the other side. So heterogeneity in the growth process within developing world has created these fissures where interests are conflicting.
Yeah, so there are groups within groups too. Yeah.
But my point here is that you see developed countries, irrespective of what conflicts Japan, US and EU may have, they try to balance each other in some other areas and try to remain together on many of these conflicting issues. Not that they do not have conflicting issues, but unfortunately developing countries are not coming up with the maturity that is required in global negotiations. So BRICS countries probably would have to play far more constructive role in terms of safeguarding each other's interest and then getting as a bloc in these negotiations. And there I think the developing countries, South-South cooperation leaders would have to take, I think, more concerted efforts.
But you know, how do you look at what the WTO you know, representative was also talking about, that it's very important that countries we have to make do with whatever is possible and whatever is manageable at this point of time. There's a lot of scope and need for compromise. What should one make out of that? The essence of multilateralism and all that is being talked about, but what is it? What is he really hinting at?
I think if you really look at the issues, some of the issues are basically non-negotiable for any country. So if you look at India's main concern with respect to the public stockholding for food security purposes, India has been actually making this demand for a long period of time. I mean, maybe for the last 20 years actually. Some momentum was actually achieved in the Bali Ministerial. Then there was one General Council decision in 2014. Then there was another decision in 2015 in the Nairobi Ministerial Conference. So ideally speaking, the WTO membership should have found a solution to the food security problem, because what is actually happening at the moment is that there is no agreement, there is no treaty framework under international law in order to provide a complete waiver in case a developing country actually exceeds or breaches the commitment under the agriculture agreement. So they are only providing a kind of a temporary solution, saying that even if you exceed this particular limit, no dispute may be actually filed against you in the interim. But no solution is actually coming out. But as a matter of fact, the developed countries, the people who had actually long stake in this particular system, should have found out a particular remedy to the problem concerned.
Okay, we'll take a very short break now in Public Forum. Please stay tuned for more on the other side of this break. Welcome back. Commerce and Industry Minister Suresh Prabhu led a multi-ministry delegation to the 11th Ministerial Conference of the World Trade Organization, called MC11, in Argentina's capital, Buenos Aires, this week, which ended in stalemate late on Wednesday as member nations failed to set aside differences on issues ranging from the role of the trade body as a multilateral institution to public procurement programs for food security. It's also important to note that the WTO's landmark trade facilitation agreement came into force this year. It is expected to also provide a much-needed boost to the global growth, in particularly trade. But how does it help India? That's an issue we are going to look at now. Let's now reflect largely on the Indians, the concerns that have been expressed by India. The point that India wants a permanent solution to the issue of public stockholding, and there's nothing that we seem to be really achieving so far in the WTO negotiations. That actually reflects largely on the platform and its relevance, and these negotiations, the relevance of these negotiations rather, in future.
I think, Shalini, if we take a step back and look at the Bali WTO Ministerial, there was this understanding that since nothing was moving in multilateral platform, let us achieve the low-hanging fruit, and people thought that trade facilitation was the one. Everybody agreed. India had already implemented several measures related to trade facilitation, which largely was seen as an agenda that was driven by developed countries. But very soon, right in 1999, India moved in and we established several measures for trade facilitation. So when it came in the Bali WTO Ministerial, there wasn't much for us to gain by agreeing to that, but India blocked global negotiations largely to press for this 10% AMS calculation.
Yes.
And that's where the world agreed that India would not be dragged to WTO dispute panel, and that was called as peace clause, and a permanent solution would be found out. It did not happen in Nairobi. It hasn't happened in Buenos Aires either. So the fact that our Commerce Minister, Mr. Suresh Prabhu, pressed for a permanent solution, I think is completely rational on part of India to do so. It is pity that in last 2 years, the WTO members have failed to come up with a permanent solution. But I think peace clause is no loss for us. We are continuing with that.
We are continuing with that,
as James mentioned, it's important for us to have this settled permanently.
Right. But as you said, that it's not a loss for us, which means how long can we really sustain like this? I mean, so far you don't see any impact particularly on how we pursue the food security program and the kind of subsidies we need to give. But in the long run, what is it that we are looking for? And are we really hopeful for this permanent solution to be sought by the other member states too, unitedly on that forum?
So if you really look at the public stockholding issue, the board is actually in the developed country court, because so long as this moratorium or the peace clause applies, nobody can actually take India to a WTO dispute. But at the same time, there are reporting requirements, notification requirements, which India will have to comply with, or any other country will have to comply with for that matter. So the real issue is that the developed countries at the moment are actually raising a large number of social clauses. So when you really look at trade and gender, or when you look at the MSME sector, so I mean nobody has got an issue with respect to these matters, but they want to actually bring in these kind of issues in order to basically muddle the agenda. So that is one particular concern, and the second is that they do not want to agree for this particular peace clause. So the peace clause should have been actually agreed upon in this particular round, because it doesn't make India's situation worse. India has got the benefit, and nobody can actually challenge India's measures for maybe indefinite period of time. But ideally, in the scheme of things, there should have been a permanent solution in this particular ministerial conference.
But let's also look at the arguments that the other countries had made regarding the high subsidies. They have said that they have a problem there. Why is it that the countries are not able to reach a solution? There's a history to it.
The point is that if you look at the agriculture agreement, it is actually a work in progress agreement, and there were mandated negotiations that started in, I think, in 1999 for that matter. So when you really look at the agriculture agreement, there are a range of issues. The one is basically export competition. The second is basically what you call as the amber box subsidy or the trade distorting subsidies, domestic support. And then you have got the agriculture market access, which is basically reducing tariffs as well. So when you think about reforming the agriculture agreement, you have to address each and every component of this agreement. But at the same time, this peace clause is only with respect to certain kind of trade support given by developing countries, because they have got a de minimis provision at the moment. When any developing country actually breaches the de minimis, there is a potential that they could be taken up for WTO dispute settlement. But on the other hand, India doesn't have an amber box. The developed countries have actually got this amber box, which has to be reduced over a period of time. On these issues, these countries do not want a final solution. So they want to actually delay the process with respect to the reform proposals on other aspects of the agriculture agreement, and therefore they are actually using this peace clause only to delay the matter.
Okay, but how is this TFA really going to help the countries? The fact that the larger idea is that the global trade, it really picks up, and all those barriers to trading, they are brought down. Now, is it really going to happen?
No, as Shalini, you know very well, this government has huge priority on ease of doing business, and ease of doing business is nothing but trade facilitation. So we are committed to that, and our consistent improvement in our performance and we going up the ladder is absolutely clear. So we are committed to trade facilitation agreement. We are committed to transparency in customs, custom valuation, in terms of introduction of RMS, what is called as risk management system. ICE Gate is already operating. So we are pretty well placed in terms of all the 3 articles that are to be implemented under the trade facilitation agreement. So we are on track, and we have achieved. We are actually enabling fellow developing countries by our development assistance to do that. The fact that you see a major kick up in global trade this year, from 2.7% what you were expecting, you are now at 3.6%. So this huge jump is going to give you a major opportunity, because if you see from 1998 to 2009, the trade actually was just the double of the global economic growth. So trade was growing at double the speed of the pace at which GDP was growing. In 2009 onwards, you find a phase where this has come almost at the same pace. So trade growth declined, and it became almost at par with GDP. In fact, in 13-14 it declined. This time now we are expecting that if 17 pace goes off as 3.6%, probably it would be 3:1 from 2018 onwards.
All right.
So if that pace comes in, trade facilitation is the way forward for all the countries to ensure whatever their targets are.
So what next for the WTO? What is it that we should be expecting now in the coming years? Because as they said, that this is more like we are reaching the next ministerial in the next in the 2 years' time with almost nothing in our hands.
I mean, it's pity, Shalini, but the fact is that global trade governance now has got into 2 tiers. WTO itself has got into 2 tiers. One is the traditional trade governance, which requires you to have dispute panel system working in the minimum rules and regulations that are required to be followed. But the new trading requirements, as you mentioned in the beginning, about trade and services, the new investment regime, the e-commerce, TRIPS-related provisions, working groups on MSME. Okay. These are all, I mean, what James was mentioning as the new issues. All these new issues are not fitting in your first tier.
Right.
So they create a second one. The unfortunate part is multilateralism would be serving the first tier,
okay.
Everybody,
right.
And second one would be more plurilateral in nature.
Okay.
So few select ones would be hanging around that and moving forward, while the first one would remain where it is. Okay. And as a result, you find a trend where bilateral, regional, sub-regional,
all this will pick up.
They all are coming up.
Okay. One concluding remark from you. Would you agree with what Dr. Chaturvedi just said?
Yeah, I generally agree with that thing. My own feeling is that when you really look at the WTO, I mean, the spokesperson said that there should not be any blockbuster at the end of the day. But it is very true that the WTO dispute settlement mechanism is functioning really well. It has actually given around 500 disputes. So that means whenever countries have got certain kind of differences, yep. they can go to the dispute settlement system.
Right.
But when we really think about the new issues like investment facilitation, even the whole issue of investment is extremely contentious and controversial, for the time being. Many countries are actually withdrawing from these bilateral investment treaties. ISDS, the investor-state dispute settlement, is actually, it is frowned upon. So when you really look at the global scenario, this is not the time to have trade agreements. And at the same time, we have some hope in the system, in the sense that the work program is being continued. There could be something on fisheries subsidies in 2020.
Fine. So there's a lot basically that's really going to happen in future, but one can see that the trends are changing, and the global trends, the global economic pace is rather deciding the way this kind of an agreement can really happen, or whether the essence of multilateralism really remains intact or not. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining me in this program. Well, that's all for today in Public Forum. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.